On June 25, 2009, the world stopped. News channels interrupted their regular programming. Social media crashed. People gathered in city squares from Los Angeles to London, from Tokyo to Johannesburg. They weren't there because of a natural disaster or a historic election. They were there because Michael Jackson had died, and with him, it felt like something irreplaceable had been lost. But this isn't a story about an ending. This is a story about a beginning that changed everything. Imagine being 5 years old and discovering you have a gift so powerful that it could lift your entire family out of poverty. Imagine being 11 and performing for millions, your voice and moves so captivating that grown men and women wept. Now imagine that this was just the start, that you would go on to create music that would unite every race, every language, every corner of this planet in a way no one had ever done before. This is the story of Michael Joseph Jackson, a boy from Gary, Indiana, who became the most famous person on Earth. You think you know Michael Jackson. You've heard the rumors, seen the tabloid covers, watched the music videos. You know about the moonwalk, the sequin glove, the songs that made you move. But do you really know the man behind the legend? Do you know about the frightened child rehearsing until his feet bled? The young man who studied Fred Astaire and James Brown for hours, teaching himself to become something entirely new? The humanitarian who donated over $300 million to charity? Michael Jackson wasn't just a singer or dancer. He was a cultural force unlike anything we'd seen before or have seen since. His album Thriller sold over 100 million copies worldwide and remains the best-selling album of all time. In an era before the internet, before streaming, this one man created something that reached virtually every country on the planet. But statistics don't tell you the real story. They don't tell you about the perfectionist who would record the same vocal line 50 times until it was exactly right. They don't tell you about the shy, soft-spoken person who transformed the moment he stepped on stage. They don't tell you about the father who desperately wanted his children to have the normal life he never had. And yes, they don't tell you about the controversies, the allegations, the media circus. They don't tell you about the physical pain from years of performing, about the emotional toll of being the most scrutinized person on the planet, about the loneliness that comes from fame so intense you can't walk down a street without causing chaos. Michael Jackson's life was a contradiction. He was powerful yet vulnerable, confident yet insecure. He could command a stage in front of 100,000 people with absolute authority, then struggle to make eye contact in conversation. He was loved by millions yet felt profoundly alone. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to walk through his extraordinary journey. From that small house in Gary, Indiana, to the biggest stages in the world. We'll be there for the magical moment when he moonwalked across the stage at Motown 25. We'll explore the creation of Thriller, an album that became a cultural phenomenon. We'll see him at his peak, breaking every record, winning every award, achieving the impossible. But we won't look away from the difficult parts either. The changing appearance, the mounting accusations, the legal battles. We'll try to understand the person behind the headlines, to see both his incredible strengths and his very human weaknesses. This is not a story with easy answers. Michael Jackson was complicated, his life full of extreme highs and devastating lows. He created transcendent art that touched the soul, yet made choices that were questionable. He gave the world joy, yet his own life was often filled with pain. But one thing is certain, there has never been anyone quite like Michael Jackson. His impact on music, dance, and popular culture is immeasurable. Whether you loved him or criticized him, you couldn't ignore him. So let's go back to August 29, 1958. Let's go to Gary, Indiana, to a house filled with music and children and dreams. Let's meet a boy named Michael who would grow up to become the king of pop. This is the story of Michael Jackson. Not the caricature, not the tabloid version, but the real person behind the legend. A story of incredible talent, relentless ambition, groundbreaking achievement, and heartbreaking tragedy. Are you ready? Then let's begin. Before we start, if you enjoy this audiobook, please consider subscribing to EchoLib and hitting the like button. It helps us bring you more incredible stories like this one. Now, let's dive in. Chapter 1, Beginnings in Gary, Indiana. Gary, Indiana, in the 1950s was not a place where dreams typically came true. It was a steel town, a working-class city about 30 miles southeast of Chicago, where the air smelled of factory smoke and the sound of industrial machinery never quite faded. The skyline was dominated by the smokestacks of U.S. Steel, and most men who lived there worked in those mills, punching clocks and coming home exhausted, their lungs filled with metallic dust. It was into this world, on August 29, 1958, that Michael Joseph Jackson was born, the seventh of 9 children in the Jackson family. His parents, Joseph Walter Jackson and Catherine Esther Scruggs, lived in a tiny 2-bedroom house at 2300 Jackson Street. The house was so small that the children had to share beds, and privacy was a luxury no one could afford. But what the Jackson home lacked in space, it made up for in something else entirely: music. Catherine Jackson loved music with a passion that ran deep in her soul. She had grown up with dreams of being a country and western performer, playing clarinet and piano, singing whenever she could. Though polio had left her with a permanent limp and derailed those dreams, the music never left her. She sang to her children, taught them melodies, filled the cramped house with harmonies that seemed to expand the walls themselves. Joseph Jackson, known to everyone as Joe, had his own musical ambitions. In the early 1950s, before the children came in rapid succession, he had played guitar in a rhythm and blues band called the Falcons. They'd performed in local clubs, and for a brief moment, Joe had tasted what it might be like to make a living through music. But bills needed paying, and dreams didn't feed children. So Joe had taken a job as a crane operator at the steel mill, hanging his guitar on the wall like a monument to what might have been. That guitar, though, wouldn't stay on the wall for long. The Jackson children grew up in an environment where music wasn't just entertainment, it was survival, escape, and possibility all rolled into one. Joe was strict, impossibly strict by any standard, a man who believed that discipline and hard work were the only ways to overcome the limitations of poverty and race in 1960s America. He had seen too many talented black men and women in Gary have their dreams crushed by circumstance. If his children had talent, and he was beginning to suspect they did, he wasn't going to let anything, least of all laziness or lack of discipline, stand in their way. The oldest boys, Jackie, Tito, and Jermaine, were the first to show serious musical interest. Tito, in particular, was fascinated by his father's guitar. He would sneak it off the wall when Joe was at work, teaching himself chords, being careful to put it back exactly as he'd found it. This went on for months until one day, inevitably, a string broke. Joe came home and saw the broken string. The boys braced for punishment, but something unexpected happened. After the initial anger subsided, Joe made Tito play for him. And when Tito did, when Joe heard his son coaxing real music from that guitar, something shifted. If Tito could teach himself to play that well, Joe thought, imagine what he could do with proper instruction. Imagine what all of them could do. That was the moment the Jackson 5 was born, though they didn't know it yet. Joe began training his sons with an intensity that bordered on obsession. After his shifts at the mill, often exhausted, he would come home and put the boys through their paces. They would rehearse for hours, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. If they missed a step, hit a wrong note, showed anything less than complete commitment, there would be consequences. Joe's discipline was harsh, sometimes crossing lines that today would be considered abuse. He believed the world would be even harsher to young black performers, and if they were going to make it, they had to be absolutely perfect. Young Michael watched all of this from the sidelines. He was only 5 years old when his brothers formed their group, too young to be included. But he watched everything. He absorbed every move, every note, every correction Joe made. Michael had something his brothers didn't quite possess, an almost supernatural ability to mimic and then improve upon what he saw. When Catherine sang, Michael could match her pitch perfectly. When his brothers danced, Michael would copy them, but somehow his movements were sharper, more fluid, more instinctive. It didn't take long for everyone to notice. Marlon, just a year older than Michael, was brought into the group, and soon after, so was Michael. He was barely 6 years old, but when he sang, something magical happened. His voice had a quality that was impossible to describe, a maturity and emotional depth that seemed impossible for a child so young. When Michael performed, even in their tiny living room, it was as if he understood heartbreak, longing, joy, and pain in ways that should have been beyond his years. The group began performing locally. They played talent shows, opening acts at small venues, community centers, anywhere that would have them. They called themselves the Jackson Brothers at first, later becoming the Jackson 5. And wherever they played, people noticed Michael. Not just because he was the youngest or the smallest, but because he had star quality radiating from him like heat from a flame. Michael's childhood, from that point on, was unlike any other child's. While other kids were playing baseball or watching cartoons, Michael was rehearsing. While they were sleeping in on weekends, Michael was performing. School became something squeezed in between rehearsals and shows. Normal friendships became nearly impossible. The neighborhood kids didn't understand why Michael couldn't come out to play, why he always seemed to be working. But Joe saw something in Michael, in all his sons, that was worth the sacrifice. He saw a way out of Gary, a way to give his family opportunities that he'd never had. And if that meant pushing them harder than most parents would, if it meant demanding perfection when they were exhausted, if it meant being feared rather than loved, Joe was willing to make that trade. Catherine provided the counterbalance. Where Joe was harsh, she was gentle. Where he criticized, she encouraged. She made sure the boys knew they were loved, even when their father's methods seemed cruel. She taught them values from her Jehovah's Witness faith, instilled in them a sense of humility and spirituality that would, particularly in Michael's case, stay with them throughout their lives. By 1967, the Jackson 5 had built a serious local reputation. They won talent show after talent show, their trophy collection growing almost as fast as their reputation. They played the Apollo Theater's Amateur Night in Harlem, one of the most intimidating stages in America for any performer, and they didn't just survive, they conquered it. The Apollo audience was notoriously tough, quick to boo anyone who didn't measure up, but they loved the Jackson 5. They loved Michael most of all. Word spread. Important people in the music industry started hearing about these 5 brothers from Gary, especially about the youngest one with the incredible voice and natural stage presence. Gladys Knight saw them perform and was amazed. Bobby Taylor of the Vancouvers was blown away and helped arrange an audition with Motown Records, the most important black-owned record label in America. In the summer of 1968, the Jackson 5 auditioned for Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown. Michael was 9 years old. He sang, he danced, he poured everything he had into that audition. And when it was over, Berry Gordy knew he was looking at something special. He signed them immediately. Everything was about to change. The small house on Jackson Street, the steel mills, the struggle to make ends meet, all of it was about to become part of their past. The Jackson family was moving to California, and young Michael Jackson, still just a child who should have been worried about homework and playground games, was about to become a superstar. But success, as Michael would learn over the next 40 years, came with a price that no 9-year-old could possibly understand. As the Jackson 5 prepared to leave Gary behind, Michael was leaving more than just a city. He was leaving behind any chance at a normal childhood, stepping into a spotlight that would never, for the rest of his life, turn off. Chapter 2, The Jackson 5 Phenomenon. California in 1969 was a world away from Gary, Indiana. The sunshine, the palm trees, the sprawling homes, the sense that anything was possible, it was intoxicating and overwhelming all at once. For the Jackson brothers, especially young Michael, it must have felt like landing on another planet. Motown Records wasn't just a label, it was a machine designed to create stars. Berry Gordy had built an empire on the principle that with the right songs, the right choreography, the right image, and relentless hard work, he could take raw talent and transform it into something that would dominate the charts. He had done it with Diana Ross and the Supremes, with the Temptations, with Marvin Gaye, with Stevie Wonder. Now, he was determined to do it with the Jackson 5. But Motown had never seen anything quite like Michael Jackson. The label put the brothers through an intensive training program. They attended Motown's famous finishing school, where they learned not just how to perform, but how to handle interviews, how to dress, how to carry themselves in public. They worked with the best choreographers, vocal coaches, and musicians in the business. Every detail was scrutinized, refined, perfected. For most of the brothers, this was exciting but manageable. For Michael, it was like coming home. He absorbed everything with a hunger that amazed even the seasoned professionals at Motown. He would watch a dance move once and execute it perfectly. He studied the way experienced performers used the microphone, how they connected with an audience, how they used silence as powerfully as sound. At just 10 years old, Michael Jackson was becoming a student of showmanship in ways that took most performers decades to understand. Diana Ross took a special interest in the group, particularly in Michael. Berry Gordy promoted the story that Diana had discovered them, though it wasn't quite true. But the connection between Diana and Michael was real. She saw something in him, perhaps recognized a kindred spirit, someone who lived and breathed performance the way she did. She mentored him, gave him advice, showed him the ropes of navigating fame. In October 1969, the Jackson 5 released their first single with Motown. The song was called I Want You Back, and it was an instant sensation. Michael's voice on that track, pleading and soulful, belied his age completely. When people heard it on the radio, many assumed they were listening to a grown man, not a child barely into double digits. The song shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and suddenly, the Jackson 5 weren't just Motown's new group, they were the hottest act in America. What happened next was unprecedented. Their second single, ABC, hit #1. Then their third, The Love You Save, #1 again. Their fourth single, I'll Be There, you guessed it, #1. For consecutive chart-topping hits with their first 4 singles, something that had never been done before and hasn't been done since. The Jackson 5 weren't just successful, they were a phenomenon. Michael, at the center of it all, was experiencing fame at a level few adults could handle, let alone a 10-year-old boy. Girls screamed when they saw him. Crowds mobbed the group wherever they went. They appeared on every major television show, from Ed Sullivan to American Bandstand. They had their own cartoon series. Lunchboxes, posters, dolls, every imaginable piece of merchandise bore their faces, especially Michael's. The performances were electrifying. Michael didn't just sing, he performed with his entire body, every movement purposeful and dynamic. He would spin, slide, and dance with an energy and precision that seemed almost impossible. His brothers were talented, no question, but when Michael took center stage, you couldn't look away. Even then, even as a child, he had that indefinable quality that separates a good performer from a legend. But behind the screaming fans and #1 hits, there was a cost that few people saw. Michael was working constantly. The touring schedule was relentless. Television appearances, recording sessions, photo shoots, interviews, it never stopped. While other kids his age were riding bikes and playing with friends, Michael was in hotel rooms, on tour buses, in recording studios. Education became sporadic at best. The brothers had tutors who traveled with them, but real schooling, the kind where you sit in a classroom and make friends and learn how to navigate social situations, that was gone. Michael would later talk about looking out hotel windows and seeing kids playing in parks, wishing he could join them, knowing he never could. Joe Jackson's discipline didn't ease with success, it intensified. If anything, he became more demanding. A wrong note in rehearsal could lead to harsh consequences. The perfectionism that had driven the group to success became a form of tyranny. Michael, sensitive by nature, felt this more acutely than his brothers. He wanted to please his father, craved his approval, but it seemed no matter how well he performed, it was never quite enough. The relationship between Michael and Joe would remain complicated throughout their lives. In interviews, Michael would sometimes talk about his fear of his father, about how he would get physically sick before Joe entered a room. Yet he also acknowledged that without Joe's relentless pushing, they might never have escaped Gary. It was a painful paradox, being grateful for success while resenting the methods that achieved it. Catherine remained Michael's emotional anchor. She provided the love and gentleness that balanced Joe's harshness. Her Jehovah's Witness faith became increasingly important to Michael. It gave him a moral framework, a sense of purpose beyond fame and fortune. Even at the height of Jackson 5 mania, Catherine made sure the boys understood that their gifts came with responsibilities, that they should remain humble and grateful. By 1971, the Jackson 5 had conquered America and were making serious inroads internationally. They toured Europe and Australia, discovering that Jackson mania was a global phenomenon. Everywhere they went, thousands of fans mobbed them. Michael, now 12, was becoming one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. Motown, recognizing Michael's unique star power, began releasing his solo material alongside Jackson 5 Records. His first solo single, Got to Be There, showcased a more tender, romantic side of his voice. It was followed by Rockin' Robin and Ben, a ballad about a rat that became his first solo #1. Michael Jackson was now a solo star as well as part of the hottest group in music. But success in the music industry, especially for black artists in the early 1970s, came with limitations. The Jackson family was making Motown a fortune, yet they saw relatively little of that money. Standard practice at the time meant that artists, particularly young ones without sophisticated representation, were often locked into contracts that favored the label heavily. The Jacksons were rich by Gary standards but nowhere near as wealthy as their record sales suggested they should be. More concerning to Joe was creative control. Motown's system was rigid. Berry Gordy and his team chose the songs, arranged them, decided on the image, controlled every aspect of the product. For a family that had been performing and arranging their own material since the Gary days, this was increasingly frustrating. The boys, especially Michael and Jermaine, were writing songs, developing their own musical ideas, but Motown rarely used them. Tensions were building, though the public saw none of it. On stage, on television, in interviews, the Jackson 5 were all smiles, all energy, all joy. Michael's smile was particularly radiant, his enthusiasm seemingly boundless. Few people knew that behind that smile was a boy who was exhausted, lonely, and increasingly aware that he was missing something fundamental. He was the most famous child in the world, but he had no real childhood. He was surrounded by people constantly, but often felt profoundly alone. The Jackson 5 phenomenon of the early 70s was a remarkable moment in pop culture history. They broke barriers, topped charts, influenced fashion, and changed what people thought a pop group could be. They made it acceptable for young people, black and white, to love the same music. In an America still deeply divided by race, the Jackson 5 were a unifying force, proof that talent and joy could transcend social barriers. And at the center of it all was Michael, the little boy with the big voice and the even bigger talent, learning lessons about fame, artistry, and sacrifice that would shape the rest of his extraordinary life. Chapter 3: Transition and Independence. By 1975, the landscape had shifted. The Jackson 5 were still successful, still touring, still recording, but the white-hot fever of those early years had cooled. Musical tastes were changing. Disco was rising. Rock was fragmenting into dozens of subgenres. The formula that had worked so brilliantly in 1969 felt dated just 6 years later. More importantly, the Jackson brothers were no longer children. Michael was 17, Jermaine was 21, and they all had ideas about their music, their image, their future. The Motown system that had launched them to stardom now felt like a cage. They wanted to write their own songs, produce their own records, have creative control over their destiny. Berry Gordy, understandably protective of the formula that had made everyone millions, was reluctant to change. The breaking point came over money and creative freedom. After years of negotiations, lawsuits, and family meetings, the Jackson brothers made a decision that shocked the music industry. They were leaving Motown. It was a gamble, leaving the label that had made them stars, but they believed it was necessary for their artistic growth. There was a complication, though. Jermaine had married Berry Gordy's daughter, Hazel, in 1973. His loyalty was divided between his family and his father-in-law's empire. When the split finally happened in 1975, Jermaine made the painful choice to stay with Motown. The Jackson 5, as the world knew them, no longer existed. The remaining brothers, Jackie, Tito, Marlon, Michael, and their younger brother Randy, who replaced Jermaine, signed with Epic Records, a subsidiary of CBS. But there was another problem. Motown owned the name Jackson 5. The group that had defined their lives, that had been their identity for nearly a decade, wasn't even theirs. They had to start over with a new name, the Jacksons. For Michael, this transition period was crucial. He was no longer a child star, but he wasn't yet established as an adult artist. This is where most child performers fail, unable to make that leap, forever defined by their youth. Michael was determined not to let that happen. He had been releasing solo material throughout the Jackson 5 years, with varying degrees of success. But now, at 17 and 18, he was thinking more seriously about his solo career, about what kind of artist he wanted to be. He studied music obsessively, listened to everything from classical to rock to soul, analyzed what made songs work, what made performers captivating. In 1977, Michael got an opportunity that would change everything. He was cast in The Wiz, a reimagining of The Wizard of Oz with an all-black cast, playing the Scarecrow opposite Diana Ross's Dorothy. The movie itself wasn't a commercial success, but something happened during that production that was far more important. Michael met Quincy Jones. Quincy was a legendary producer and arranger, someone who had worked with everyone from Frank Sinatra to Count Basie. He was sophisticated, knowledgeable, and saw in Michael something beyond the former child star. They connected immediately, not just musically but intellectually. Quincy recognized that Michael had serious artistic ambitions, and Michael found in Quincy a mentor who could help him realize them. Their collaboration would have to wait, though. First, Michael had to prove himself with the Jacksons. The group's albums on Epic were decent but not groundbreaking. They were touring successfully, and Michael's stage presence was becoming even more powerful. He was developing moves that would become iconic, studying dancers like Fred Astaire and James Brown, absorbing their techniques and making them his own. But the albums weren't making the cultural impact Michael wanted. He was writing more, contributing songs like Shake Your Body that became hits, but he felt constrained by the group dynamic. He loved his brothers, but their musical visions didn't always align. Michael wanted to push boundaries, experiment, create something that would make people see him differently. In 1978, Michael reconnected with Quincy Jones and proposed they work together on his next solo album. Quincy agreed, and they began crafting what would become Off the Wall. Michael was 19 now, no longer a cute kid with a great voice but a young man with something to prove. He wanted this album to establish him as a serious artist, someone who could hold his own in the adult contemporary music world. The sessions for Off the Wall were intense. Michael was a perfectionist in the studio, doing take after take until he felt it was right. Quincy pushed him, challenged him, brought in top-tier musicians and songwriters. They crafted a sound that blended disco, funk, pop, and soul into something that felt fresh and sophisticated. When Off the Wall was released in August 1979, it was a revelation. This wasn't Jackson 5 Michael or even the Jacksons' Michael. This was a mature artist with a distinctive voice, both literally and artistically. Songs like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and Rock With You showcased his range, his rhythmic sophistication, his ability to make you move while also making you feel. The album was a massive success. It produced 4 top 10 singles, sold millions of copies, and earned Michael his first Grammy as a solo adult artist. Critics praised it. Fellow musicians respected it. Most importantly, it proved that Michael Jackson could succeed outside the Jackson 5, that he wasn't just a former child star clinging to past glory. But for Michael, the success of Off the Wall wasn't entirely satisfying. Despite the sales and acclaim, he felt the album didn't receive the recognition it deserved. He won 1 Grammy, but he thought it should have won more. He wasn't nominated for Album of the Year. The respect he craved from the music industry still felt just out of reach. This dissatisfaction, rather than making him bitter, fueled his ambition. If Off the Wall wasn't enough, he would create something that couldn't be ignored. He would make an album so undeniable, so perfect, that the world would have no choice but to recognize him as more than a great performer, as one of the greatest artists of his generation. During this transition period, Michael was also changing physically and emotionally. The cute kid was gone, replaced by a striking young man. He was incredibly shy in person, soft-spoken, almost childlike in his mannerisms, yet on stage he was commanding, sexual even, completely transformed. This dichotomy would become more pronounced as he got older, the difference between private Michael and public Michael growing more extreme. He was also becoming more isolated. Fame at the level he experienced made normal relationships nearly impossible. He couldn't go to movies, couldn't walk through a mall, couldn't have casual friendships. Everyone wanted something from him. Even family dynamics were complicated by money, fame, and the pressure of maintaining success. Yet creatively, Michael was entering his prime. He was 21 years old, had been performing professionally for 15 years, and had absorbed more about music, dance, and entertainment than most people learn in a lifetime. He had vision, ambition, and now, with Quincy Jones as his collaborator, he had the means to realize his dreams. The transition from child star to adult artist was complete. Michael Jackson had proven he could succeed on his own terms. But he wasn't satisfied with success. He wanted something more, something unprecedented. He wanted to change the world. And he was about to do exactly that. Chapter 4, Off the Wall, Adult Stardom. The success of Off the Wall should have been enough for most artists. It sold over 20 million copies worldwide, became one of the best-selling albums of 1979 and 1980, and established Michael Jackson as a force in adult contemporary music. But Michael wasn't most artists. He had a vision that extended far beyond commercial success. He wanted to create something that would transcend music, something that would change the culture itself. And he believed, with an almost obsessive certainty, that he could do it. The off-the-wall era was a time of artistic maturity for Michael. At 21, he had finally shed the last remnants of his child star image. The album's sound was sophisticated, blending the smoothness of soul with the energy of disco and the accessibility of pop. It was music for dancing, yes, but it also had depth, emotion, and craftsmanship that elevated it above typical dance floor fare. The opening track, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, was Michael's own composition, a funky, energetic declaration of independence. His falsetto soared over a bed of horns and percussion, and there was something undeniably joyful about it. The song won him his first Grammy as a solo artist in the R&B category, and it established that Michael Jackson wasn't just a great performer, he was a legitimate songwriter. Rock With You was smoother, more romantic, showcasing the versatility of his voice. He could go from powerful and energetic to tender and intimate within the same album, within the same song even. This range would become one of his defining characteristics. But perhaps the most telling track was She's Out of My Life, a ballad so emotionally raw that Michael reportedly cried every time he recorded it. Quincy Jones kept those takes because the emotion was genuine, palpable. It showed a vulnerability that would become increasingly rare as Michael's fame grew more intense. Working with Quincy Jones was transformative for Michael. Quincy demanded excellence but also gave Michael room to experiment, to push his own boundaries. Their relationship was part mentor-student, part creative partnership. Quincy understood the music business in ways Michael was still learning, and he protected Michael from some of the industry's harsher realities while teaching him how to navigate them. The production of Off the Wall also revealed Michael's work ethic in the studio. He was meticulous, sometimes doing dozens of takes for a single vocal line. He'd layer his voice, creating complex harmonies with himself. He'd work on phrasing until every syllable felt right. Some producers might have found this tedious, but Quincy recognized it as the mark of a true perfectionist, someone who understood that great art required great effort. The album's success brought Michael a new level of respect from his peers. Musicians who had dismissed him as just a kid from a pop group now saw him as a serious artist. But the mainstream music industry, particularly the Grammy voters, still seemed hesitant to fully embrace him. When Off the Wall received only one Grammy despite its massive success, Michael was deeply hurt. This rejection, if you can call it that, became fuel for his next project. Michael began telling people, including Quincy, that his next album would be the biggest-selling album of all time. Some thought he was delusional. Others thought it was youthful arrogance. But Michael believed it with absolute certainty. During this period, Michael was also evolving as a performer. The Jacksons were still touring, and Michael's performances were becoming increasingly theatrical. He was incorporating more complex choreography, studying films of dancers like Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, and particularly James Brown. He watched their movements frame by frame, analyzing how they used their bodies, how they created that magical connection with an audience. One move in particular caught his attention, the backslide, a dance move that had been around in various forms for years. Michael practiced it obsessively, refining it, making it smoother, more dramatic. He wasn't ready to unveil it yet, but he was preparing for the moment when he would. Michael's personal life during this time remained complicated. His fame made normal relationships impossible. He was surrounded by people constantly, but genuine connection was rare. He grew closer to some celebrities who understood the isolation of fame, people like Elizabeth Taylor and Diana Ross, but even those friendships existed in the strange bubble of celebrity. His relationship with his family, particularly his father Joe, remained strained. While Michael acknowledged his father's role in his success, the emotional scars from Joe's harsh discipline methods ran deep. Michael had moved out of the family home and bought his own place, creating physical distance that reflected the emotional distance that had always existed. Yet Michael remained close to his mother Catherine. Her influence kept him grounded, reminded him of values beyond fame and fortune. Her Jehovah's Witness faith continued to shape his worldview, giving him a moral framework that would inform much of his later humanitarian work. Financially, Michael was becoming savvy. He was learning about publishing rights, royalties, and the business side of music. He asked questions, studied contracts, and began understanding that the real money in music wasn't in performing but in owning the rights to songs. This knowledge would serve him well in the years to come. But even as Michael enjoyed his success, even as he performed to sold-out crowds and saw his face on magazine covers, he was already thinking about what came next. Off the Wall had proven he could succeed as an adult solo artist. Now he wanted to prove he could be more than successful, he wanted to be legendary. He began writing songs for his next album, saving his best ideas, refusing to waste them on anything less than what he envisioned as his masterpiece. He told Quincy they would work together again, and Quincy agreed, though he perhaps didn't fully grasp the ambition of what Michael was planning. The Off the Wall era was crucial in Michael Jackson's evolution. It was the bridge between his past as a child star and his future as the king of pop. It proved he had the talent, the vision, and the work ethic to compete at the highest levels of the music industry. It earned him respect, wealth, and artistic credibility. But for Michael, it was just the beginning. He had tasted success on his own terms, and it had only made him hungrier. He was 22 years old, and he was about to embark on creating something that would change not just his life, but the entire landscape of popular music. The world had seen what Michael Jackson could do. They had no idea what he was about to do next. Chapter 5, Thriller, Conquering the World. In 1982, Michael Jackson was about to do something that seemed impossible. He was about to create an album that would shatter every record, break down every barrier, and redefine what popular music could achieve. That album was Thriller, and its impact on music, on culture, on the world itself, cannot be overstated. The recording sessions began with Michael and Quincy Jones reuniting, both determined to surpass what they'd achieved with Off the Wall. But this time, Michael's ambition was crystal clear. He didn't just want a hit album. He wanted every single song to be a potential hit. He wanted to create something so undeniable that the music industry would have no choice but to recognize him as the greatest. The creation of Thriller was meticulous. Michael wrote several tracks himself, including Wanna Be Startin' Somethin' and Billie Jean, 2 songs that would become classics. For other tracks, he collaborated with the best songwriters and producers in the business. Rod Temperton, who had written Rock With You for Off the Wall, contributed Thriller. James Ingram worked on PYT. And for one crucial track, Michael convinced legendary rock guitarist Eddie Van Halen to contribute a blistering solo to Beat It. That decision, to put a hard rock guitar solo on a pop song, was revolutionary. In 1982, rock and pop existed in separate worlds. Rock radio didn't play pop. Pop fans didn't listen to rock. Black artists rarely crossed over to rock audiences, and white rock musicians rarely appeared on black artists' records. Michael didn't care about these invisible walls. He wanted to make music that everyone could love, regardless of race or genre preferences. The recording process showcased Michael's perfectionism at its extreme. For Billie Jean, he recorded the vocal track in one take, but the mix took weeks to perfect. Michael had an almost supernatural ability to hear problems in a mix that others couldn't detect. He'd make engineers adjust things by tiny fractions until it sounded exactly right to his ears. Some thought he was being difficult. Quincy understood he was being brilliant. Thriller was released on November 30, 1982. Initial sales were strong but not extraordinary. The album was competing with major releases from other artists. But then something happened that would change everything. Michael was invited to perform on the Motown 25 television special in March 1983, celebrating the label's 25th anniversary. Michael agreed to perform with his brothers, but he also insisted on performing Billie Jean solo. What happened that night became one of the most iconic moments in entertainment history. Michael wore a black sequin jacket, a single white glove, and black pants that were just slightly too short, revealing white socks above black loafers. And then, in the middle of the performance, he did something no one had seen before. He moonwalked. The move, which Michael had refined from earlier dance techniques, created the illusion that he was walking forward while actually gliding backward. It was smooth, effortless, otherworldly. The audience in the venue went wild. The 50 million people watching at home lost their minds. That single moment catapulted Thriller from successful album to cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, everyone wanted to see Michael Jackson. Billie Jean shot up the charts. MTV, which had been reluctant to play videos by black artists, found itself overwhelmed by requests for Michael's music. The network had largely ignored him before, but they couldn't ignore the demand. Michael Jackson was forcing MTV to integrate, breaking down racial barriers in music television that had seemed immovable. The music video for Billie Jean was visually striking, with Michael's dancing taking center stage. But it was the video for Beat It that really pushed boundaries. Directed by Bob Giraldi, it featured actual gang members from Los Angeles alongside professional dancers, telling a story of urban conflict resolved through dance. The video was more like a short film, with a narrative arc, character development, and a message. It cost $500,000, an unprecedented amount at the time. But Michael wasn't done. He wanted to create something even more ambitious for the title track, Thriller. He approached John Landis, who had directed An American Werewolf in London, and proposed creating a genuine horror short film, not just a music video. The concept was audacious, 14 minutes long, with makeup effects, choreographed zombies, and a complete narrative structure. CBS Records refused to fund it. They thought Michael was crazy, that no one would watch a 14-minute music video. So Michael and his advisors found outside investors, essentially creating the first independently financed music video. The budget was $600,000, astronomical for a music video, though pocket change for a Hollywood production. The Thriller video premiered in December 1983 and became a cultural event. MTV played it twice an hour. People recorded it on VHS tapes and watched it repeatedly. The choreography, with Michael and his zombie dancers performing synchronized moves, was copied by millions of people around the world. Halloween costumes that year were dominated by Michael Jackson's red jacket from the video. By this point, Thriller, the album, was selling at a rate never seen before. It spent 37 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard 200. It produced 7 top 10 singles, an unprecedented achievement. It won 8 Grammy Awards in a single night, with Michael and Quincy sweeping nearly every category they were nominated in. The music industry that had ignored Off the Wall couldn't ignore this. Michael Jackson had forced them to acknowledge his genius. The numbers were staggering. Thriller would eventually sell over 100 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling album of all time, a record it still holds today. But the numbers don't capture what Thriller meant culturally. It was an album that everybody owned, black and white, young and old, in America and around the world. It was music that transcended every demographic boundary. Michael Jackson had become the biggest star on the planet. His influence was everywhere. Young boys wore single white gloves. They practiced moonwalking in their driveways. They tried to match his vocal inflections and his dance moves. He wasn't just a musician, he was a phenomenon, someone who defined what it meant to be a superstar in the 1980s. The success of Thriller also made Michael incredibly wealthy and gave him unprecedented power in the music industry. He could demand and receive almost anything. Record companies competed for his favor. Brands offered him enormous endorsement deals. He signed with Pepsi for what was then the largest endorsement deal in history, $5 million. But even at the peak of his success, Michael remained restless, driven. He'd achieved what he set out to do, created the biggest album of all time, but he was already thinking about what came next. How do you follow up perfection? How do you exceed success that seems impossible to exceed? For most artists, Thriller would have been the pinnacle, the achievement that defined their entire career. For Michael Jackson, it was just proof that when he set his mind to something, no matter how impossible it seemed, he could achieve it. He had conquered the world, but he wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. The Thriller era made Michael Jackson immortal in the annals of popular music. It proved that great art could also be commercially successful, that you didn't have to compromise artistic vision to reach massive audiences. It showed that music could unite people across racial, cultural, and generational lines. But success at this level comes with costs that aren't immediately visible. The pressure to maintain it, to follow it up, to keep being Michael Jackson, king of pop, would weigh on him for the rest of his life. He had reached the mountaintop, and from there, there's only one direction to go. For now, though, in 1983 and 1984, Michael Jackson was simply the biggest thing in the world. And he had earned every bit of it. Chapter 6: The Height of Fame. Following up Thriller was an impossible task. How do you top the best-selling album of all time? How do you exceed a cultural phenomenon that had united the entire world? Michael Jackson, characteristically, didn't try to replicate Thriller. Instead, he decided to reinvent himself entirely. The period between Thriller and his next album, Bad, was filled with both triumph and transformation. Michael's fame had reached levels that were almost incomprehensible. He couldn't go anywhere without causing riots. Simply stepping out of a car could create chaos. Children screamed. Adults cried. The entire world seemed to be in love with Michael Jackson. But this level of fame came with a price. Michael became increasingly isolated, spending more and more time behind the walls of his estate. Going to a movie theater or walking through a park, simple pleasures most people take for granted, were impossible for him. His world became smaller even as his fame became larger. In 1985, something significant happened that showed Michael's business acumen. He purchased the ATV music publishing catalog for $47.5 million. This catalog contained the rights to over 4,000 songs, including most of the Beatles' catalog. Paul McCartney, who had once advised Michael about the value of music publishing, was reportedly upset when Michael outbid him for the catalog. But it was a brilliant business move that would generate income for Michael for decades. This purchase also revealed something important about Michael. He wasn't just an artist, he was a shrewd businessman who understood that real wealth in the music industry came from owning intellectual property, not just from performing. He studied the business side of music as carefully as he studied dance moves. In 1987, 5 years after Thriller, Michael finally released Bad. The pressure on this album was immense. Everyone expected it to match or exceed Thriller's success, an expectation that was probably unrealistic. Michael worked with Quincy Jones again, spending over a year crafting the album, recording hundreds of songs and narrowing them down to the final 11 tracks. The title track, Bad, showed a different Michael. He was tougher, edgier, trying to shed the nice guy image. The video featured Michael in black leather, with buckles and zippers, surrounded by dancers in a subway setting. Some critics thought he looked silly trying to appear tough, but fans loved it. The choreography was intricate, aggressive, and undeniably cool. Bad couldn't match Thriller's sales, nothing could, but it was still enormously successful. It produced 5 #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100, a record that still stands. Songs like The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, Smooth Criminal, and Dirty Diana showed Michael's range, from romantic to socially conscious to narratively complex. Smooth Criminal, in particular, showcased Michael's continued innovation in music videos. The video featured the famous lean, a move where Michael and his dancers tilted at a seemingly impossible 45-degree angle. He had special shoes designed with a heel slot that hooked into a peg on the stage floor, allowing the illusion. It was typical Michael, combining technical innovation with theatrical flair. The Bad World Tour, which lasted from 1987 to 1989, was the first time Michael toured as a solo artist. It was spectacular. The production values were unlike anything seen before in a concert tour. Elaborate stage sets, costume changes, pyrotechnics, and choreography that required military precision. Michael performed to over 4.5 million people across the globe, breaking attendance records everywhere he went. But something was changing. Michael's appearance was noticeably different. His skin was lighter, his nose was thinner, his face had changed significantly from the Thriller era. Rumors and speculation swirled. Tabloids had a field day, inventing increasingly bizarre stories about him. Michael would later reveal he had vitiligo, a condition that destroys skin pigmentation, and that he had undergone some plastic surgery, though he downplayed the extent. The media's fascination with Michael's appearance sometimes overshadowed his artistry. He was becoming as famous for his eccentricities as for his music. Stories circulated about him sleeping in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, trying to buy the Elephant Man's bones, and other bizarre claims. Most were exaggerations or complete fabrications, but they stuck in the public consciousness. In 1991, Michael released Dangerous, an album that marked a significant shift in his sound. He worked with Teddy Riley, a pioneer of New Jack Swing, alongside Quincy Jones. The result was a more contemporary, harder-edged sound that incorporated hip-hop influences. Songs like Jam, Remember the Time, and In the Closet showed Michael adapting to changing musical trends while maintaining his distinctive style. The Dangerous album also featured Black or White, a song about racial harmony with a video that premiered simultaneously in 27 countries to an audience of 500 million people. The video featured groundbreaking morphing technology, showing faces of different races blending into one another. It was a powerful statement about unity, though a controversial ending sequence featuring Michael angrily smashing car windows and grabbing his crotch overshadowed the message for some viewers. Michael's Super Bowl performance in 1993 was another watershed moment. Before Michael, Super Bowl halftime shows were modest affairs with marching bands. Michael's performance was a full-scale production that transformed what halftime shows could be. He stood motionless on stage for nearly 2 minutes after emerging, building suspense, before launching into a medley of hits. The performance drew higher ratings than the game itself and set a new standard for halftime entertainment. During this period, Michael's humanitarian efforts became more prominent. He donated millions to charity, visited sick children in hospitals around the world, and used his platform to raise awareness about issues like AIDS, environmental conservation, and world hunger. He founded the Heal the World Foundation and genuinely believed that his music and influence could make the world better. His business deals during this time were record-breaking. He signed a contract with Sony for almost $1 billion, the largest recording contract in history. He had his own label imprint, his own merchandise empire, and controlled every aspect of his image. Michael Jackson wasn't just a performer, he was a brand, an industry unto himself. But the isolation was increasing. Michael's circle of friends grew smaller. He trusted fewer people. The constant scrutiny, the invasion of privacy, the tabloid lies, they were taking a toll. He began building Neverland Ranch, a sprawling estate with amusement park rides, a zoo, and a movie theater. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could retreat from the world. Neverland reflected Michael's desire to recapture the childhood he never had. He invited underprivileged children to visit, hosted charity events, and tried to create a magical place free from the harsh realities of adult life. To Michael, Neverland was paradise. To outsiders, particularly as controversies mounted, it seemed increasingly strange. The height of Michael Jackson's fame, from the mid-1980s through the early 1990s, was extraordinary. He released multiple successful albums, toured the world, broke records, and remained relevant even as musical tastes changed. He proved that Thriller wasn't a fluke, that he could sustain success at the highest levels. But the cracks were beginning to show. The pressure, the isolation, the constant scrutiny, they were building towards something. Michael was the most famous person in the world, but that fame was becoming a prison. He had everything money could buy, yet happiness seemed elusive. The king of pop was at his peak, but the crown was growing heavy. And the challenges that would define the second half of his life were just beginning to emerge. Chapter 7: The Man Behind the Music. Behind the sequined gloves and moonwalks, behind the record-breaking albums and sold-out stadiums, was a man far more complex than the public persona suggested. To understand Michael Jackson, you had to look beyond the stage, beyond the headlines, to the person struggling with the weight of extraordinary fame. Neverland Ranch, Michael's 2,700-acre estate in Santa Barbara County, was perhaps the most revealing window into his soul. Purchased in 1988 for $19.5 million, Michael transformed it into something that seemed pulled from a fantasy. There was a full amusement park with rides including a Ferris wheel, carousel, and roller coaster. A private zoo housed giraffes, elephants, and exotic animals. A movie theater could seat 50 people. There were gardens, lakes, and even a railway. To outsiders, Neverland seemed eccentric, even bizarre. But to Michael, it represented something profound, the childhood he never had. From age 5, he'd been rehearsing, performing, working. He'd watched other children play from hotel windows, unable to join them. Neverland was his attempt to create a world where he could experience the innocence and joy that had been stolen from him. Michael regularly invited underprivileged children to Neverland, particularly those who were sick or disadvantaged. He'd spend time with them, ride the attractions alongside them, and try to give them a day of pure happiness. To Michael, this was among his most important work, more meaningful perhaps than any record he'd ever made. He genuinely believed in the healing power of joy, especially for children who had suffered. His personal relationships were complicated by fame. Genuine connection was nearly impossible when you're the most famous person on earth. People wanted something from him: money, access, a piece of his celebrity. Michael became increasingly isolated, his circle of trust growing smaller and smaller. One friendship that endured was with Elizabeth Taylor. She understood fame at his level, having been a child star herself. They connected over their shared experience of growing up in the spotlight, of having their childhoods consumed by their careers. Elizabeth was one of the few people Michael felt he could be himself around, one of the few who saw past the king of pop to the vulnerable person beneath. In 1994, Michael surprised the world by marrying Lisa Marie Presley, daughter of Elvis Presley. The marriage seemed surreal to many, the king of pop marrying the daughter of the king of rock and roll. Skeptics claimed it was a publicity stunt, particularly given the timing after recent controversies. But those close to the couple insisted the connection was real, that they genuinely cared for each other. Lisa Marie later spoke about Michael's complexity, his intelligence, his sense of humor that few people saw. She described someone who was incredibly lonely despite being constantly surrounded by people, someone who craved normalcy but whose life was anything but normal. The marriage lasted less than 2 years, though they remained close afterward. The pressure of their combined fame, along with disagreements about having children, proved too much. In 1996, Michael married Debbie Rowe, a dermatology nurse who had treated his vitiligo. Their relationship was different from his marriage to Lisa Marie, less about romance and more about Michael's deep desire to become a father. Debbie gave birth to 2 children, Prince Michael in 1997 and Paris in 1998. Michael was ecstatic. Fatherhood became one of his greatest joys, and he was determined to give his children the normal childhood he never had. Michael was fiercely protective of his children's privacy. He often had them wear masks in public, trying to shield them from the relentless media attention. Some criticized this, but Michael saw it as protecting their ability to have normal lives. He wanted them to be known for who they were, not just as Michael Jackson's children. His third child, Prince Michael II, nicknamed Blanket, was born in 2002 via surrogate. Michael's dedication to his children was absolute. He homeschooled them, took them to museums and cultural events, and tried to instill in them the values his mother Catherine had taught him: humility, spirituality, and compassion. Michael's spiritual life remained important throughout his adulthood. Though he formally left the Jehovah's Witnesses in 1987, partly because of conflicts between his career and their teachings, the faith's influence never entirely left him. He maintained a belief in God, frequently spoke about divine purpose, and saw his talent as a gift meant to heal and unite people. His humanitarian work was extensive and genuine, though often overshadowed by controversies. He donated over $300 million to various charities during his lifetime. He visited children in hospitals around the world, often without media present, simply because he wanted to bring them joy. He supported causes ranging from AIDS research to disaster relief to children's education. The song "Man in the Mirror" perhaps best captured Michael's philosophy. He believed change started with the individual, that making the world better began with personal responsibility. He challenged himself and others to look inward, to confront their own biases and shortcomings. It was more than just a song, it was a mission statement. But Michael's life wasn't just about lofty ideals and philanthropy. He had interests and quirks that made him human. He loved films, particularly Disney movies and classic Hollywood musicals. He'd watched the same movies repeatedly, studying them, analyzing what made them work. He collected art, particularly paintings and sculptures that depicted children or childhood innocence. He was also surprisingly funny in private. People who knew him well described someone with a mischievous sense of humor, who enjoyed practical jokes and had a distinctive giggle that was both childlike and infectious. This side of Michael rarely came through in interviews, where he was often soft-spoken and careful with his words. His relationship with his family remained complex. He was closest to his mother Catherine, speaking with her almost daily. His relationships with his siblings varied, some closer than others, all complicated by the business of being Jacksons. His relationship with his father Joe remained strained, though Michael acknowledged his father's role in his success even while struggling with the emotional scars from his childhood. Michael was also incredibly intelligent, though he often played down his intellect. He was well-read, knowledgeable about history and culture, and had a sharp business mind. He studied other artists obsessively, not just their performances but their careers, their mistakes, their triumphs. He learned from everyone, absorbed everything, constantly trying to improve. His perfectionism extended to every aspect of his life. He'd spend hours getting ready for public appearances, making sure every detail was right. He rehearsed constantly, even for performances he'd done hundreds of times. To Michael, good enough was never good enough. Excellence was the only acceptable standard. But this perfectionism also created immense pressure. He lived in constant fear of disappointing his fans, of his talent diminishing, of being forgotten. The boy who had been told he had to be perfect to succeed had become a man who couldn't accept anything less from himself. The isolation, the pressure, the constant scrutiny, they took a toll. Michael struggled with insomnia, often going days with minimal sleep. He dealt with chronic pain from old injuries sustained during performances. He turned to prescription medications to manage the pain and help him sleep, beginning a dependence that would have tragic consequences. Yet through it all, Michael remained devoted to his art and his mission. He believed music could heal, could unite, could make the world better. He believed his purpose was to bring joy to others, particularly to children. And despite the personal cost, despite the loneliness and pain, he continued trying to fulfill that purpose. The man behind the music was vulnerable, lonely, and deeply human. He had flaws and struggles like everyone else, magnified by the extraordinary circumstances of his life. He was both the confident performer who commanded stages in front of hundreds of thousands and the shy individual who struggled with face-to-face conversation. He was powerful and fragile, generous and guarded, complex and contradictory. Understanding Michael Jackson means accepting these contradictions, seeing him as a complete human being rather than just an icon. Behind the legend was a person trying to make sense of an impossible life, trying to find meaning in fame that had consumed him since childhood, trying to give to others the joy and normalcy he could never fully have himself. Chapter 8: Challenges and Controversies. The higher you rise, the further you can fall. For Michael Jackson, who had reached heights no entertainer had ever achieved, the descent into controversy would be equally unprecedented. The 1990s and 2000s brought challenges that would overshadow his artistic achievements and permanently complicate his legacy. In 1993, at the peak of his Dangerous World Tour, Michael's life changed forever. A 13-year-old boy named Jordan Chandler, whose family had befriended Michael, accused him of sexual abuse. The allegations shocked the world and unleashed a media firestorm unlike anything Michael had experienced before. Michael vehemently denied the accusations. Those close to him insisted he was incapable of such acts, that his love for children was innocent and pure. But the damage was immediate and devastating. Pepsi terminated his endorsement deal. Television networks pulled his videos. Public opinion, which had been overwhelmingly supportive, became divided and suspicious. The investigation was extensive and intrusive. Michael was subjected to humiliating physical examinations, his home was searched, and every aspect of his life was scrutinized. The stress was immense. Michael, already struggling with prescription medication dependence for chronic pain and insomnia, became even more reliant on these drugs to cope. In 1994, Michael settled the civil case with the Chandler family for an amount reported to be around $23 million. He maintained his innocence, and his lawyers argued that the settlement was made to avoid a prolonged legal battle that would have been emotionally and professionally devastating. The settlement included no admission of guilt, but to many people, paying such a sum seemed like an admission regardless. The criminal investigation continued but was eventually closed without charges being filed. The lack of criminal prosecution didn't resolve the court of public opinion, though. Michael's reputation was permanently damaged. He went from being beloved by virtually everyone to being viewed with suspicion by many. The tabloid media, which had long been fascinated with Michael, became increasingly aggressive. Stories about his appearance, his lifestyle, his relationships, they were relentless. Many were exaggerations or complete fabrications, but the public often couldn't distinguish truth from fiction. Michael became Wacko Jacko, in tabloid parlance, a figure of ridicule as much as admiration. His changing appearance fueled much of the speculation. Michael's skin had become significantly lighter over the years. He attributed this to vitiligo, a condition where patches of skin lose pigmentation. Medical experts confirmed he had the condition, and autopsy reports would later verify this. But many people didn't believe him, accusing him of trying to become white, of being ashamed of his African American heritage. The truth was more complex. Michael had vitiligo, which created uneven patches of light and dark skin. To create a more uniform appearance, he used depigmentation treatments and makeup. He also underwent multiple plastic surgeries, particularly on his nose. His appearance became increasingly altered, and whether this was due to body dysmorphia, the pressure of fame, or other factors, only Michael truly knew. The scrutiny extended to every aspect of his life. His friendships with children, which he maintained were innocent and motivated by his desire to recapture his lost childhood, were viewed through a lens of suspicion. Neverland, once seen as whimsical, was now portrayed as sinister. Everything Michael did was interpreted in the worst possible light. Financially, Michael was also facing pressures. Despite earning hundreds of millions throughout his career, his spending was equally extraordinary. Neverland cost millions to maintain. He employed a large staff, bought expensive art and antiques, and was famously generous, often to a fault. His business managers struggled to control spending that sometimes reached $30 million a year. In 2003, Michael's world collapsed again. New allegations of child abuse emerged, this time from Gavin Arvizo, a young cancer survivor Michael had befriended. In November 2003, Michael was arrested and charged with multiple counts of child molestation and administering an intoxicating agent. The trial, which began in 2005, was a media circus. Hundreds of reporters descended on the Santa Barbara courthouse. Every detail of the proceedings was dissected. Michael, wearing pajama bottoms to court one day after a hospital visit, became the subject of mockery. The dignity he had worked so hard to maintain was stripped away day by day. The prosecution's case portrayed Michael as a predator who used his fame and Neverland to lure and abuse children. The defense argued that the accuser's family had a history of making false claims and seeking money from celebrities. Character witnesses testified to Michael's gentle nature and his genuine love for children in an innocent, protective way. The trial lasted 5 months. Michael attended every day, though the toll was visible. He lost significant weight, appeared frail, and seemed to age years in just months. The stress was consuming him, and he leaned more heavily on prescription medications to cope. In June 2005, the jury returned its verdict, not guilty on all counts. Michael was acquitted completely. His supporters celebrated, believing justice had been served. His detractors remained convinced of his guilt regardless of the verdict. The legal system had spoken, but public opinion remained divided. The acquittal didn't restore Michael's life to what it had been. The damage was too extensive. He largely left Neverland afterward, unable to return to a place that had been violated by investigators and tainted by the accusations. His relationship with America was fractured. While he remained popular in many parts of the world, particularly Europe and Asia, in his home country, he had become a controversial figure. His finances deteriorated further. Legal fees from the trial exceeded $20 million. His income had dropped dramatically as controversy drove away business opportunities. He was forced to refinance loans using his music catalog as collateral, and creditors were becoming increasingly aggressive. Michael's health, both physical and mental, suffered tremendously. The chronic pain from old injuries persisted. The insomnia worsened. His dependence on prescription medications, particularly powerful painkillers and sedatives, deepened. Those around him became increasingly concerned but struggled to help someone so isolated and so accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life. The controversies and legal battles overshadowed everything else Michael tried to accomplish. New music was ignored or dismissed. His humanitarian work was forgotten. His artistic legacy was questioned. Everything was viewed through the prism of the allegations, regardless of the acquittals and lack of criminal convictions. It's impossible to discuss Michael Jackson's life without addressing these controversies, just as it's impossible to know with absolute certainty what the truth was. The legal system found him not guilty. No criminal charges ever resulted in conviction. But the court of public opinion is different from a court of law, and for many people, questions remained. What is certain is that these years took an enormous toll on Michael. The man who had once conquered the world, who had united millions through his music, who had broken down barriers and achieved the impossible, was broken by these accusations. Whether innocent or guilty, whether victim or perpetrator, Michael Jackson in the mid-2000s was a shadow of what he'd been. The challenges and controversies of these years would define how many people remembered him, often overshadowing 4 decades of artistic achievement. They revealed the dark side of fame, the vulnerability of even the most powerful celebrities, and the devastating impact of accusation regardless of verdict. Michael Jackson had survived many things in his life: a harsh childhood, the pressure of being a child star, the challenge of sustaining unprecedented success. But surviving these controversies, maintaining his dignity and his sense of self, proved to be his greatest struggle. And in many ways, it was a struggle he would never fully overcome. Chapter 9: Later Years and Comeback Attempts. After the 2005 trial, Michael Jackson was a free man legally, but in every other way, he was trapped. Trapped by debt, by damaged reputation, by declining health, and by the weight of being Michael Jackson. The final years of his life would be marked by attempts to reclaim his throne, to prove he was still the king of pop, even as circumstances conspired against him. Michael left the United States shortly after his acquittal, unable to face the country that had put him through such an ordeal. He spent time in Bahrain as a guest of Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad Al Khalifa, a member of the Bahraini royal family and a fan. There, away from American media, Michael tried to find peace and rebuild his life. But financial problems followed him everywhere. His spending had never stopped, even as his income plummeted. Neverland, which cost roughly $5 million a year to maintain, was in foreclosure. He owed millions to various creditors. The catalog of songs he owned, including the Beatles' catalog that was worth hundreds of millions, was being used as collateral for increasingly desperate loans. In 2006, Michael returned to the United States but avoided California, spending time on the East Coast. He made occasional public appearances, each one analyzed obsessively by media and fans. He looked frail, his voice was weak in interviews, and it was clear he was struggling. The confident, dynamic performer seemed to have disappeared. His children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, remained his primary focus and source of joy. Despite his own difficulties, Michael was devoted to being a good father. He continued to shield them from media attention, homeschooled them, and tried to provide stability even as his own life was increasingly unstable. Musically, Michael had been relatively quiet since Invincible in 2001. That album, his final studio release during his lifetime, had been caught in a bitter dispute with Sony Music. Michael accused the label of not properly promoting it, claiming they were trying to sabotage him to gain control of his valuable music catalog. Sony denied these accusations, but the relationship between Michael and his longtime label had deteriorated completely. Invincible had actually been quite successful despite the drama, producing several hits and selling millions of copies worldwide. But by Michael's standards, and certainly by the expectations people had for a Michael Jackson album, it was considered a disappointment. The magic formula of Thriller, Bad, and Dangerous seemed to have faded. Michael's later years were marked by announcements of projects that never materialized. There were talks of new albums, of comeback tours, of various business ventures. Fans waited eagerly for each announcement, hoping to see their idol return to glory. But repeatedly, these plans fell through or were postponed indefinitely. Part of the problem was Michael's health. Years of performing had taken a brutal toll on his body. He had chronic back pain from old injuries. His insomnia had become severe, with Michael sometimes going days without meaningful sleep. The prescription medications he relied on to manage pain and help him sleep had become a serious dependence, something those around him were increasingly worried about. His appearance continued to change in ways that concerned friends and fans. He was extremely thin, often looking gaunt. His skin was pale and sometimes appeared waxy. His nose, after multiple surgeries, looked fragile. He often wore surgical masks in public, claiming various health reasons but also perhaps hiding from the world that had hurt him so deeply. In 2008, there were glimmers of hope. Michael began serious discussions about a comeback. He needed money desperately, but more than that, he seemed to need validation. He wanted to prove he was still Michael Jackson, still capable of the magic that had made him the biggest star in the world. He wanted one more moment of triumph. Those close to him had mixed feelings. Some believed a comeback tour would be therapeutic, giving Michael purpose and reconnecting him with the love of his fans. Others worried it was too much, too soon, that his health couldn't handle the demands of major performances. But Michael was determined, and when Michael Jackson decided something, it was difficult to dissuade him. In March 2009, Michael held a press conference in London announcing, "This is it, a series of 50 concerts at the O2 Arena." The announcement shocked the world. 50 shows was an enormous commitment, more than any artist his age typically attempted. But Michael promised these would be his final performances, his farewell to his fans, and tickets sold out in hours. The preparation for "This Is It" was intense. Michael assembled a team of the best dancers, musicians, and production designers in the industry. He wanted these shows to be spectacular, to remind everyone why he was the king of pop. Rehearsals were demanding, with Michael pushing himself and his team to achieve perfection. Those who attended rehearsals had varying impressions. Some days Michael seemed energized, his dancing sharp, his voice strong. He could still move in ways that defied his age and health struggles, still had that spark that made him magical. Other days he seemed tired, frail, unable to complete full run-throughs. But everyone involved believed that when the shows began, Michael would rise to the occasion the way he always had. Behind the scenes, though, there were serious concerns. Michael's physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, was administering propofol, a powerful surgical anesthetic, to help Michael sleep. Propofol is not meant for home use, and using it as a sleep aid is extraordinarily dangerous. But Michael, desperate for rest after years of insomnia, had become dependent on it. The financial pressure was immense. Michael needed these shows to be successful not just artistically but commercially. He owed hundreds of millions of dollars. Neverland was gone, foreclosed on and sold. His future depended on "This Is It" being the comeback he promised. Michael's relationship with his family during this time was complicated. His mother Catherine remained close and supportive. Some siblings were involved in his life, others distant. His father Joe, with whom Michael's relationship had been strained for decades, hovered at the periphery. The Jackson family dynamics, always complex, were further complicated by money problems and differing opinions about Michael's career moves. As the June 2009 opening date for "This Is It" approached, anticipation built worldwide. Fans from every country planned trips to London. Media speculated about whether Michael could still perform at the level people expected. Michael himself seemed both excited and anxious, aware that this was possibly his last chance to control his own narrative, to be remembered for his art rather than his controversies. In rehearsals during June, Michael worked tirelessly despite obvious exhaustion. He was perfecting choreography, approving costume designs, and planning every detail of what he envisioned as the greatest concert experience ever created. He told people these shows would be magical, that they would remind the world who Michael Jackson really was. Friends who saw him during those final weeks described someone who was tired but hopeful. He talked about the future, about plans after the London shows, about finally achieving financial stability. He spoke lovingly about his children and his desire to give them the life he never had. He seemed, despite everything, to have found a purpose again. The comeback Michael Jackson hoped for was within reach. 50 sold-out shows that would earn hundreds of millions of dollars, restore his reputation, and secure his legacy. It was all there, waiting for him, just days away. But Michael Jackson would never take that stage. The comeback the world was waiting for would never happen. On June 25, 2009, everything changed forever. Chapter 10, Legacy and Lasting Impact. June 25, 2009, started like any other day in Los Angeles, but it would end as one of the most shocking days in entertainment history. Michael Jackson, just weeks away from his comeback tour, was found unresponsive at his rented mansion in Holmby Hills. Paramedics were called. Desperate attempts were made to revive him. But at 2:26 p.m., Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at UCLA Medical Center. He was 50 years old. The cause of death was acute propofol intoxication combined with other sedatives. Dr. Conrad Murray, who had been administering the drugs to help Michael sleep, was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The king of pop, who had survived so much in his turbulent life, had ultimately been killed by the very medications he relied on to find peace. The world's reaction was unprecedented. Within minutes, news websites crashed from the traffic surge. Twitter experienced its first major outage as millions tried to share the news simultaneously. In Times Square, people stopped and stared at news screens in disbelief. Around the globe, fans gathered in city squares, outside record stores, anywhere they could be together in their grief. The outpouring of emotion revealed something important. Despite the controversies, despite the tabloid mockery, despite everything that had happened in the troubled later years of his life, people still loved Michael Jackson. They loved what he had given them through his music, his dancing, his performances. They loved the joy he had brought into their lives. His memorial service, held at the Staples Center in Los Angeles on July 7, 2009, was watched by an estimated 1 billion people worldwide. It was one of the most viewed events in television history. Performers and speakers included Stevie Wonder, Lionel Richie, Mariah Carey, and Magic Johnson. His daughter Paris, just 11 years old, spoke briefly but powerfully, telling the world that her father had been the best father anyone could ask for. There wasn't a dry eye in the arena. In the weeks and months following his death, something remarkable happened. Record stores couldn't keep his albums in stock. His music dominated download charts and radio airplay. People who had forgotten how much they loved his music remembered. A new generation discovered him for the first time. Thriller returned to the top of album charts nearly 30 years after its initial release. The "This Is It" rehearsal footage was compiled into a documentary film that became one of the highest-grossing concert films ever made. Audiences packed theaters to see what would have been the performance that never happened. The footage showed Michael still had magic, that despite his age and health issues, he could still command a stage. It was bittersweet, a glimpse of the comeback that would never be. Michael's legacy in music is impossible to overstate. He didn't just make popular music, he transformed what popular music could be. Before Michael, music videos were simple promotional tools. He turned them into an art form, mini-movies with narratives, choreography, and production values that rivaled actual films. Every modern music video owes something to what Michael pioneered. His influence on dance is equally profound. The moonwalk became part of global culture. His choreography, the precision, the athleticism, the way he used his entire body as an instrument, set a new standard. Watch any contemporary pop performer, from Justin Timberlake to Usher to Bruno Mars to The Weeknd, and you'll see Michael's influence in how they move, how they perform, how they understand stagecraft. Vocally, Michael was unique. That distinctive timbre, the way he could shift from powerful belting to delicate falsetto, the rhythmic hiccups and vocal punctuations that became his signature, all of it was instantly recognizable. Countless singers have tried to emulate him, but there was only one Michael Jackson voice. As a songwriter and producer, Michael was innovative and meticulous. He wrote many of his biggest hits and had a clear vision for his sound. He pioneered recording techniques, spent countless hours perfecting mixes, and understood that great records weren't just about good songs but about every sonic detail being exactly right. His impact on breaking down racial barriers cannot be ignored. Michael forced MTV to play videos by black artists when the network had largely ignored them. He proved that music could transcend racial boundaries, that everyone, regardless of background, could love the same songs. In a still divided America, Michael Jackson's music was a unifying force. The business side of Michael's legacy is also significant. His purchase of the ATV catalog showed artists that owning intellectual property was crucial. His record-breaking contracts changed industry standards. He proved that artists could have power and control, that they didn't have to be victims of the system. His humanitarian work, often forgotten amid the controversies, was substantial. Over $300 million donated to charity. Countless hospital visits to sick children. Using his platform to raise awareness about AIDS, environmental issues, and social justice. The Heal the World Foundation and its mission to help disadvantaged children. Michael genuinely believed his success came with responsibility to help others. But Michael's legacy is complicated by the allegations that dogged his later years. Some people cannot separate the art from the artist, cannot enjoy his music without thinking about the accusations. Others point to his acquittals, to the lack of any criminal conviction, and believe he was innocent, a victim of extortion and a culture that delighted in destroying celebrities. This tension, between celebrating his artistic genius and grappling with the controversies, will likely persist. Future generations will have to decide for themselves how to remember Michael Jackson, what weight to give to different aspects of his life and career. What seems certain is that Michael Jackson's music will endure. Thriller, Billie Jean, Beat It, Smooth Criminal, these songs are timeless. They sound as fresh and exciting today as they did when they were released. New artists continue to sample his work, to pay homage to him, to acknowledge his influence. The Michael Jackson estate, managed carefully after his death, has been remarkably successful. His debt was paid off. His assets were managed wisely. His children were provided for. Posthumous releases and projects have kept his name and music in the public consciousness. In death, the business side of Michael Jackson's career has been more stable than it was in his final years. His children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, have grown up largely out of the spotlight that Michael feared would consume them. They've spoken lovingly about their father, describing someone who was devoted, protective, and caring. Their memories of him are not of a global icon but of a dad who loved them unconditionally. Michael Jackson's story is ultimately one of extraordinary talent meeting extraordinary circumstances. A child prodigy pushed into stardom before he could understand what it meant. A perfectionist who achieved the impossible but paid a tremendous personal price. A humanitarian who wanted to heal the world but couldn't heal himself. An artist who gave everything to his craft but struggled to find peace in his own life. He was complicated, contradictory, brilliant, and flawed. He created transcendent art that brought joy to billions. He broke barriers and changed culture itself. He also made choices that were questionable, lived in ways that seemed bizarre to outsiders, and became entangled in controversies that diminished his later years. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Michael Jackson is simply this: there has never been anyone like him, and there likely never will be again. His level of fame, his artistic impact, his cultural influence, all of it was unique to a specific moment in time when one person could unite the entire world through music. Michael Jackson, the boy from Gary, Indiana, became the king of pop and changed the world forever. His music remains, his influence continues, and his legacy, complex as it is, will be debated and discussed for generations to come. He wanted to be remembered for his art, for the joy he brought, for making the world a little better through his music. In the end, despite everything, perhaps that's exactly how most people do remember him. Not perfect, not without controversy, but undeniably one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived. The king of pop, forever. Conclusion. And so we come to the end of our journey through the extraordinary life of Michael Jackson. From that small house on Jackson Street in Gary, Indiana, to the biggest stages in the world, from a 5-year-old boy with an incredible voice to the king of pop who changed music forever, we've walked through a life that was as tragic as it was triumphant. Michael Jackson's story reminds us that genius and humanity are not mutually exclusive. That someone can create transcendent art while struggling with profound personal demons. That fame and success, no matter how great, cannot shield you from pain, loneliness, or the human need for connection and peace. We've seen Michael at his highest peaks, moonwalking across the Motown 25 stage, creating Thriller, breaking every record imaginable, uniting the world through music. We've also seen him at his lowest points, isolated, accused, struggling with health and financial problems, desperately trying to reclaim what had been lost. Through it all, what stands out is his dedication to his craft. Michael Jackson never stopped pushing himself, never stopped trying to create magic, never stopped believing that music could heal and unite people. Whether you were in a penthouse in New York or a village in Africa, Michael's music reached you. It made you feel. It made you move. It reminded you of the power of joy. His legacy is complex, as all human legacies are. Future generations will continue to discover his music, to be amazed by his performances, to study his influence on popular culture. They'll also grapple with the controversies, the questions, the darker chapters of his story. But perhaps that's as it should be. Icons shouldn't be perfect. They should be real, complete with all the contradictions and complications that make us human. Michael Jackson gave us Thriller and Billie Jean and Beat It. He gave us the Moonwalk and music videos that were works of art. He gave us performances that seemed to defy the laws of physics and biology. He gave us a vision of what entertainment could be at its absolute peak. And perhaps most importantly, he gave millions of people around the world moments of pure joy, escape from their troubles, and connection to something larger than themselves. That's not a bad legacy for the boy from Gary who just wanted to sing and dance. Thank you so much for listening to this biography of Michael Jackson. I hope you enjoyed this journey through his remarkable life as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. His story is one that deserves to be told completely, with all its complexity, and I hope I've done justice to both his incredible achievements and his very human struggles. Now I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of this audiobook? Which part of Michael Jackson's life resonated with you the most? Did you learn something new about the King of Pop? Please take a moment to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your feedback means everything to me and helps me create better content for you. And if you're wondering what to listen to next, I have the perfect suggestion. If Michael Jackson's story of overcoming obstacles and achieving greatness inspired you, you'll love my biography of another legend who changed the world, Muhammad Ali. The greatest, as he called himself, was not just a boxing champion but a cultural icon who stood up for his beliefs and inspired millions around the globe. You can watch the Muhammad Ali biography by clicking the video on your screen right now. Trust me, his story is just as compelling, just as inspiring, and just as important to understanding modern history.